So I did my undergraduate in natural sciences. After I graduated, I went straight to work at a law firm in graduate recruitment, which I really enjoyed. And then I met PCL at the unconscious bias training that they were doing at the firm. And when it came to doing my dissertation, I was in touch with PCL and did my dissertation through them as part of the student sponsorship program. So the dissertation looked at personality and risk and the link between that and turnover in the legal population. The high-level ones were if there's a difference in risk disposition between lawyers and the rest of the population. I looked at whether there was a difference in personality and approach to risk between contentious and non-contentious or transactional lawyers. So I was also looking at risk disposition lawyers and the relationship with job satisfaction and the intention to leave an organisation. The population that I was looking at were commercial lawyers. There were a range of law firms that were represented there, but I would say that there was one firm which they came from mostly. I would say that's a high performance firm that does a lot of interesting and innovative work for big clients. These firms in general attract very high performing candidates and high performing lawyers. So unsurprisingly, lawyers were incredibly risk averse compared to the normal population, to the point where there were very few risk-taking participants in the experiment. Job satisfaction and turnover intention were inversely related. Right. So it means that people who had low job satisfaction were more inclined to leave the organisation they were at. In addition, there were a few risk types that were more prevalent in the lawyer population compared to the rest of the population, where you see with the risk type compass, they're evenly distributed around the risk profiles, but with the legal population, you see the three least risk-taking personality types highly represented in the legal population. So almost 30% of the sample were found to be wary, and under 2% were found to be adventurous. So that just speaks volumes about the lawyer's risk type disposition. In terms of how this impacts how lawyers work, wary profiles are characterised by indecision, but also rule-abiding behaviour. So you can see in terms of rule abiding how that fits in perfectly with law and practicing law. The indecision piece has perhaps a little bit of nuance that organisations should think of when they have such heavy teams in terms of this risk profile. Indecision might just mean that even within teams and throughout the wider organisation where lawyers are making these decisions, that decision making might be a bit slower because of this. I think when we're thinking about people with an adventurous profile, it's not necessarily that it would hinder them. I think they are very important to law firms, and I think having a diverse team is incredibly important in every way, including personality and the way that you approach decisions. Some of the pitfalls perhaps of having a very wary, heavy team could be counteracted by having some of these adventurous profiles about as well. In terms of hindered, I think the only thing is that perhaps they'd have less enjoyment of the job because their risk profile is so at odds with what the job requires of them and how they are required to think and act. So I think the reason we see so few adventurous types within law is perhaps they're not attracted to it in the first instance. They're not selected for it throughout the recruitment process, or they just don't stay. The traits that we look for at selection are also what you're measured against at every appraisal. So if it's so at odds with how you'd conduct yourself day to day, I'm not surprised that there are so few within the sample. And perhaps if we were looking at exclusively people who are interested in a career in law, that would be really interesting to see the differences between adventurous types within that population versus very early career versus the rest of your career. I think what's also very interesting is I had 2 people who were adventurous within my experiment, and one of them has left law and the other one no longer works at the firm that they were at. So I did find a difference between risk type and intention to leave. Those who were most likely to leave were those that were adventurous. Those that had the lowest intention to leave were deliberate and prudent. Although they weren't the 2 lowest risk types, my hypothesis was that it would be linear. So you would see it in terms of risk type, but actually when we broke it down into risk profile, that's where you saw the differences. I attribute that to the traits that you see within the prudent and deliberate profiles are very closely matched with the role of a lawyer. So they're very diligent, they are very hardworking. You can map it quite easily to the role of a lawyer. So I think that's why you see the highest satisfaction and the lowest intention to leave their jobs in those categories. If there are any differences between them, I wouldn't expect them to be different on the other side of the risk type compass. I wouldn't expect them to be hugely risk seeking. I think a lot of the traits that you see in the commercial lawyers that I looked at in my sample, they're characterised by being diligent, hardworking, and being very focused, as we've discussed. And I think that's very similar to the role of a barrister. I would be surprised if you see a hugely different risk profile for a barrister, but there might be some differences. I think it's unsurprising that lawyers are risk averse, because it's sort of a joke within the legal industry anyway, that, lawyers are very risk averse. I wasn't surprised to find that. But if you think about it seriously with the job that they do, they are mitigating risk within their roles and trying to find solutions and anticipate questions from the other side. So in terms of risk aversion and even loss aversion, if you're talking about contentious lawyers, then I think it fits the bill really well and is unsurprising. I think by having so many wary personality types in a team, it means that they are very indecisive, and it might sometimes hold up the decision-making process. Law firms might see that on a small scale, and perhaps on a larger scale. That might have implications on making change and moving things forward and deciding on strategy. I think understanding this, organisations can mitigate that if they are keen to drive decision-making forward within organisations. Also, knowing that a large percentage of your team is wary, you also have a good breakdown of what their strengths and weaknesses are. I don't mean that law firms should exclusively give particular work to these guys and then other work to other risk types, because it's important obviously to develop skills, and putting people out of their comfort zone is a very important way to learn. But I do think that it's useful to have that knowledge. Lawyers are definitely going to need to have different skills going forward. Innovation is a huge part of the legal agenda these days, and is only going to become more important. Clients are expecting it of the law firms that they're working with, and lawyers and law firms are very, very aware of this. So innovation is very important. I think this poses a problem for law firms because 30% or so of their lawyers are made up of wary individuals, and wary risk types are especially uncomfortable with being out of their comfort zone, which is a real block to innovation. In addition, innovation, I guess, is characterized by your ease with technology and being more creative, thinking out of the box, thinking of things that are not being done right now. And with other studies that have been done using the risk type compass, these guys, I think IT professionals are overwhelmingly adventurous, which is completely different from our lawyer population, and creative personalities, which very much feeds into innovation, are on the risk-taking side as well. So this needs to be something that lawyers are thinking about when they're looking for future talent. I think you can see that already happening in the legal sphere. There are some law firms that have started grad schemes that are exclusively looking at innovation and legal innovation and developing that technology, developing those processes. I agree that there should be scope for lawyers to be working alongside people whose jobs are innovation and looking at how we can innovate. I think the approach that a lot of law firms are taking right now is to create their innovation function from current lawyers who are doing the job. So yeah, it would be really interesting to see how successful that is versus firms who do a sort of synergistic approach.